This Week in Missouri Politics from our studios in Jefferson City. We are joined by the House Minority Leader and the newest Democratic candidate for governor, Representative Crystal Quade. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'll start off with the beginning. You have served in the House for 8 years, 6 of that as leader of your party. Tough go of it, lots of hard fights. You built a little momentum with your caucus in the House now. You're running for governor. Why?
You know, honestly, the last 7 years that I've been in Jefferson City each year has gotten more divisive and less has gotten done. This past year we had the fewest amount of bills outside of the year of COVID, I believe, in my lifetime.
Well, let me interrupt you though. If you're a conservative Republican, the less the government does. Ronald Reagan said the scariest words are from the government, I'm here to help. The less, if you're a conservative, the less the people from the government are here to help, that's good. And if you're the House Minority Leader, it's probably good too, right?
We've had lots of success. But the point is, I think Missourians are ready for not just stopping, but actually investing and growing and making Missouri a place that folks want to come to and a place that's thriving economically. And we've just really have been stagnant in that way and in terms of legislative policy and creative ideas. But really, for me, the extremes that have been going on here are just becoming too much, and we've got to push back. We're seeing in Jeff City here that those extreme conversations are what everyone thinks that we're doing every single day.
Because that's what the legislature is doing.
Right. And that's the thing that's frustrating is, there are so many of us here in Jeff City that want to work together to do things around childcare, to do things around investments in what Missouri actually needs in infrastructure and innovative things. And instead, we're spending time talking about things that are really not doing any good for our state. And so, quite frankly, I've had enough. And I think a lot of my voters have had enough and are looking for some change.
This video you put out to announce your candidacy, I thought it was one of the best ones I've ever seen. And I think in this race, we're undoubtedly long shot campaign. Democrats are going to have an uphill fight. It was very well done, and it told some stuff about your upbringing. You were comfortable talking about the fact that, there's some very nice parts of Springfield. There's some parts I love of Webster County. You're not some person from the richest part of Springfield. You're from Webster County. You were very open about your mother having to work very hard to provide a home for you. What made you decide to open up and talk about that?
I believe that voters deserve to know who they're voting for and who's running and who's trying to represent them. And I'm an open book. I want folks to know about my childhood, about my upbringing, about my personal views on sometimes really polarizing issues because they deserve to know who I am authentically. And I think it's really important because my upbringing, coming from a single mom, being the first in my family to graduate high school, and now I get to be the Democratic floor leader, that has shaped who I am. And that's also a big reason why I champion the issues that I champion in Jefferson City and why I ran for office to begin with, was to help people like my mom. And so I think that voters need to know that.
All right. You brought up roller derby. That's pretty cool. Tell me how you really play roller derby, that gym bag was real?
So I played roller derby for many years before I had my daughter, because you obviously cannot play roller derby while you're pregnant. And then when I ran for office, it's a really time-consuming sport. So haven't played since I've been elected. But yeah, that was my team. Some of the gals that I skated with back in the day were there for the filming, and we had a great time.
So after the campaign, at some point, you might go for an all-star game or something?
I go back and watch often. I wish that I could play. I will tell you, though, the day after filming was probably the most sore that I have been in a really long time. But yeah, I did play.
Let's talk about this race. It was an amazing run of Democrats winning the governorship from Noel Carnahan, basically, on. Since then, the Republican Party has done well at every level in this state. Really wasn't very competitive race last time with a statewide elected official running, Nicole Galloway. She lost by a significant amount. Why can you win this race?
Again, I think that folks are frustrated with how extreme and divisive our state has gotten. When I am the Democratic leader, that, make no mistake, folks know where my issues are and they know what I champion. But when I ran in 2016, I also had my yard sign in the exact same yards as Donald Trump had his. And that's because I'm from Southwest Missouri. When I knock doors, I talk to folks, and I'm not there to say, this is what I'm doing, this is what I believe in. It's, what can I do for you? What do you want me to be doing for you? And I've continued to win in Southwest Missouri, and we've continued to grow with that mentality. And we're going to do the same thing across the state. It's about increasing turnout in the cities, of course, but I'm somebody who also understands we've got to show up in rural parts of Missouri, and my job will be to represent everybody. And
so we're very interesting to me. There is a tone in the voice of some Democrats, some people, some liberals, some people in the media, that if you've ever voted for Donald Trump, you somehow committed some grievous sin. I think maybe you just thought he was the person you wanted to vote for. Maybe you didn't love everything he said and did, but you thought he was the best person, just like a lot of Missourians thought Joe Biden was or Hillary Clinton was. It's almost a dismissive tone if you voted for who you wanted to vote for. I think that may be part of maybe your ability to reach out to folks that if somebody voted for Donald Trump, it doesn't make up who they are as a person, right?
Absolutely. My dad voted for Donald Trump. My
Sure.
stepdad, my mom did, and I still love them very deeply, right? I understand that folks have very personal reasons why they may support one person or another, and can draw serious boundaries around that, and I completely respect that. My job as an elected leader is to not do that. My job as an elected leader is to see constituents and meet them where they are and actually try to understand the why. Why did you vote for Donald Trump? What was the thing that you needed that you felt like he could give you? And see if I can deliver that. And we have to move past that conversation, especially in states like Missouri. If Democrats want to win statewide, we can't be dismissive of people's experiences or viewpoints. Doesn't mean we have to agree. Doesn't even mean we have to respect each other on certain issues. But that's how you get things done. That's how I've gotten stuff done in Jefferson City.
You decided to name check one of your opponents, Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft, the front runner in the race. You didn't shy away from taking a shot right off the bat.
I did not.
What was the thought of that?
The very obvious reason, he is currently polling much higher than his opponents.
Sure.
Name recognition, he had the most amount of votes in the last statewide election from anyone on the ballot.
I don't think it's common sense to say that Jay Ashcroft currently is the front runner in the race.
Absolutely. But for me, it was not just about that. When I talk about the extremes that I know folks are frustrated with, that I hear about every day, in my mind, the secretary really embodies that with the way that he very publicly speaks about things. None of this will be surprising to him to hear me say we've gone toe-to-toe in committee hearings multiple times. But he even said on a radio show about a month ago that he doesn't think gay folks should have the right to marry. He's extreme, and that's what folks are frustrated by. They want to come back to the middle. They want to have some common sense that's actually productive in our state.
I think in this state, a lot of folks have maybe let's talk abortion. In this state, I think you could show me polling that shows Missouri is a little more one way or the other pro-life, pro-choice. At the end of the day, I've always thought in a campaign, the pro-life folks who they were on the outs, Roe versus Wade had not been overturned, that they felt the intensity, and I always thought it was a much better endorsement to get the Missouri Right to Life endorsement than to get the Planned Parenthood endorsement in the state of Missouri, because that's where the intensity was. Maybe that's not where everybody would fall if they had to pick, but the ones that were fired up. The new law, if I had to guess, is probably a little more out from where regular Missourians are. I would say regular Missourians are probably not super offended that you can't have an abortion in Missouri because you can access it in other states, but they probably think this law is a little too much. Some folks probably think the Democrats have policies that are just as extreme on the other side. How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, so first what I want to say is, again, back to authenticity and voters deserving to know where I stand on issues. This is one that I've never shied away from. Yeah. When I ran in 2016, I actually had Planned Parenthood and other groups say to me, don't take endorsements, just don't talk about it. And I did, because folks, again, deserve to know where I stand on something. But I think that you're right in that where we are now as a state is just too extreme. I knock Republican doors all the time in Springfield. Obviously, I knock both sides of the aisle, and I will have conservatives say to me, this is too much. I want government out of my doctor's office. This was just too far overreach. It's an attack on freedoms. And it's not necessarily just about that issue for some folks. It's what does that mean overarchingly of what else is government going to come after me for? What other attacks are going to exist? And we could dive into the nuances of the language of the bill, of where folks currently are in Missouri, how women are getting turned away at the doctor's offices for miscarriages and bleeding out in the parking lots. Like, those stories are happening. But it's not just about that issue. It's about the extremes that are going on in our state and this government attack on freedoms that continues across the board. And I think that it's going to help us this year.
Bill Eigel came out, state senator, who's also running for governor on the Republican side, that posted a headline about you're in sync with Missouri values. He says, which values would that be? Per recent elections, Missouri values have almost nothing in common with her. Missourians want less government protection of rights and a reckoning for the swamp of stealing from the people. Crystal Quade proposes none of these. What do you say to Senator Eigel?
I mean, I think he's just sad I didn't talk about him in my video.
Oh, that's mean.
No, I mean, I love the fact that folks are attacking me already. I mean, I don't actually love it. I wish we didn't have to do it that way. But
there's got to be some part of you, as a person who I've watched revamp that Democrat House caucus, who's won elections in tough districts. You know that if your campaign didn't matter, they would not take the time to attack you.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, the fact that we're several days after the launch and we're still getting hit on social media like crazy from the other side shows that folks are threatened, and it's, I think, a good thing.
I watched you come in to the House and take over leadership very early on in your career, and you went from a caucus that, let's be honest, probably wasn't that well organized. Probably, obviously the campaign arm was close to non-existent. And now you put together a pretty cohesive caucus, which in the minority in the House is very tough. Every rule stacked against you. And you've been picking up seats with an actual organized campaign operation. Tell folks how that translates to a gubernatorial race.
It's exactly the same, to be honest with you. When I jumped in to run, there's not a infrastructure that says, here you go, here's how you do it. Here's the staff to hire.
There was nothing.
Right, and that's how it was in the House. And that's how it is when you run statewide. And you've heard me say this a million times, but for the Democrats, it's so vitally important that we build infrastructure and that we create this campaign apparatus to start winning seats back. We've done it in the House. You're seeing it in the Senate. And we plan to do the same thing for the statewide race. And I think that one of the things that I'm very excited about is all the work that we've been doing in the House and Senate. We know where our target districts are. We know where those swing votes are. We know who can flip state Senate seats and state House seats. And so my race is going to be working in tandem with those races to make sure that our resources are going to the right places. And the work that I'm doing at the top of the ticket is helping the rest of the ticket and vice versa. And that's the thing that I'm really excited about that I think is only going to move the Missouri Democrats forward.
I got asked on the radio this week, how does she win over a voter in West Plains? And I said, I don't actually know. How does Crystal Quade go to West Plains? Not far from where you're from, went over a voter.
I mean, I go and I listen. And that's the exact same thing that I've been doing this whole time. I am a social worker and I'm a mom. I am not an expert in all of the things, right? I'm an expert in my areas, but my job is to listen for what folks need and hear them and try to deliver. And I think for too long, our politicians have come to Missouri and said, this is what we're doing, I'm gonna save you. That's not how Missouri works. That's not how Missourians work. We like to save ourselves, and they need a leader who's going to listen and work alongside them and help them in that process.
Jay Nixon always said when Democrats value labor and work, they do well. They value giving away stuff, they lose. Sounds a little bit like your message.
Well,
Jeremiah W. won a few votes back then.
I think he might have won the most votes out of anyone in our history. And I think that there's value in that. And again, growing up how I did and where I did, hard work is a value of mine, and it's absolutely something I instill in my children. And for me, we get attacked all the time as Democrats of government handouts and whatever. We want hands up programs. In fact, that's a program that I worked on legislation around that we just saw expand. For me, our role in government and role of the governor and the administration is to help constituents better themselves. It's not about handouts. It's about saying, okay, you need job apprenticeship programs. Let us help you. Okay, small business owner, you're having a hard time finding people. How can we help you do that? Okay, single mom, you are trapped in a ridiculous mathematical equation where if you take a pay raise, you lose all the help that you have. So you're stuck in poverty. What can we do to fix that? And that's the role of government, and I think that's where I'm different than my opponents.
Is that maybe not the West Plains guy, but somewhere in Springfield there's a household that voted for Jay Ashcroft, Donald Trump, Lincoln Huff, and Crystal Quade?
I believe so.
Somewhere in Platte County there's households that voted for Donald Trump, Tony Luke-Meyer, and Ashley Awney. Mm-hmm. What do you say to that person in the suburbs? Where I think probably when you look at this race and you look at the trends of this state, there are folks that are more affluent, that live in suburbs, that are considering and voting for Democrats that did not 5 years ago. How do you bring that person home?
I think, again, those types of voters are the ones who are frustrated with the extremes, that we're wasting our time up here talking about things that aren't real, manufactured crises, instead of talking about how they can invest in their kids' college education, right? Or how they can pay their bills or do X, Y, Z. That's what folks want us to be talking about. And I think that those voters are the ones that we can reach in that way.
Representative Crystal Quade, thank you for joining us. Hope as the campaign unfolds, you'll come back and talk about it here on This Week in Missouri Politics.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We'll be right back. State Senate candidate Aaron McMullen joins us.
For more than a century, the St. Louis Carpenters Union has shaped our communities. Through trusted alliances, we deliver skilled professional craftspeople while our business partners provide the kind of quality jobs that keep our economy humming. It's a blueprint that has worked since 1882. Turning Missouri into a right-to-work state stalls progress, wipes out jobs, and kills momentum. Right to work is wrong for everyone. Let's keep Missouri moving forward. Visit carpdc.org to learn more.
Thanks for joining us. Justice and Journalism with Judge Mike Carter. What I like to do is bring facts and circumstances from around the metro area with some local politicos, charitable causes, and let you decide for yourself if you like what's going on.
I'm in this for public service.
400 qualified jurors in some of the rural counties are actually really hard to find.
But when you're talking about low-level nonviolent offenders, when you put them in jail, you increase the likelihood that they turn into a serious offender.
Justice and Journalism with me, Judge Mike Carter.
Data captured by our state-of-the-art monitors helps us pinpoint the timing and location of severe weather more accurately and respond to trouble more quickly. Ameren, Missouri's investment in smart technologies like this is one way we're improving reliability and restoring power faster than ever. Responding to trouble before trouble hits. That's energy at work. Ameren, Missouri.
Welcome back to Look at Missouri Politics. Now we're going to bring you a state representative running in one of the most hotly contested Senate seats next fall. Representative Aaron McMullen, welcome back to This Week in Missouri Politics.
Thanks for having me.
So, you've been in the House for a year now. You're running for state Senate. Why make the jump so early?
Well, obviously the seat is now open, and it's with redistricting, it's now a lean Republican. And I feel like with my set of skills and knowledge, I feel like I can do the most good for Missouri in the Senate.
It really is. The two chambers are very different. I mean, you had a good run of success your first year for a freshman, but I mean, as a state senator, you really can impact really everything in state policy from the approach in the state Senate.
You're absolutely right. The amount of good that you can do for your district is just immeasurable opposed to the House.
Tell folks about you. What all have you done in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. Joined the military after 9/11. I worked for the federal government for 10 years after that. I have 2 degrees in public policy and in law. And I just lived a life of public service, and I would like to continue that for the state of Missouri.
Tell folks about your family and your kin folks.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've lived here for almost all my whole life. My father's a pastor. He's founded a church in Independence.
What church is he pastor?
Independence Christian Center. So it's actually in the district that I represent, which is absolutely fantastic. I have 2 daughters, one that's 13 and then one that is 5. I've been married for 16 years.
Got to see a picture of her on the internet, I think you put up, right?
Yeah.
She's checking, I got it. So what's your wife do?
My wife has the hardest job in the world. She's a homemaker, and she helps teach my kids.
All right, I got to ask you, the mustache, it's glorious. What's the story behind that?
So, I always have to be a little bit different, run against the grain a little bit. So when COVID hit, everybody grew a COVID beard, and I decided to grow a COVID mustache. And
I could have grown a mustache since COVID to today, and it would not look like that right there. So I know you had a competitive race, had to go hit the doors. When you're on the doors in Independence, what mattered to voters?
One of the biggest things was inflation. Gas prices were a huge concern, and they still are. They were $1.59 when Trump left office, and now they're at $3.50.
People can say what they will about Trump. Trump's a very interesting person, and there's a couple connections between a person like me from West Butler County in the Boot Heel and a person like yourself in eastern Jackson County. Trump did not necessarily overperform that much in central Missouri, southwest Missouri. He overperformed in South County. He overperformed in the Boot Heel, Jeffco, eastern Jackson County. Those, he blew any Republican numbers away. It is an interesting phenomenon with Trump, and yes, he could act like he wants to act. The fact is, scoreboard shows, when he left office, you could hand someone $2 and get change back for a gallon of gas. Now you hand them a $5 and you might not even get change back.
It's the new one.
You've been around an interesting part of the world. You've seen a lot of the world. People can make a lot of excuses. Are there things the federal government could be doing to lower gas prices for folks in Independence and for folks in West Butler County?
Absolutely. Drill, baby, drill. They've been cutting off the amount of offshore oil that we can drill, and we can be energy independent if we choose to be, but we don't. And we rely on foreign governments that are adversarial to the United States, and we're funding them.
And they're
that's
not like privately adversarial. They'll just come out and say, we're infidels and we should die.
Absolutely, openly. And I think that's an issue. It's a national security issue, and it's an issue at home for people's pocketbooks.
You know, you might find a few folks somewhere and on the plaza near where you're from, or some folks in the city of Cape Girardeau where I'm from, that might worry about, oh, a spotted owl or something. But most folks are just trying to get to work and back. They need cheap gas because it's not just cutting out a family vacation. You're cutting out, well, instead of having, you know, a pork steak, you're having canned ravioli for supper.
Absolutely, and it hits people where it's the hardest, and we've got to do something to get this under control.
Speaking of that, property taxes have been, you know, it's funny. A lot of times property taxes are, everything on your property tax, someone voted for, right? You specifically voted to raise. In St. Louis, they're very high, but I think folks in St. Louis kind of want them high. In Jackson County, they just seem out of control and incompetent all at the same time. You guys had a bill this year. You lowered the property tax for seniors. What happened to that?
It got passed by both the House and the Senate. The governor has just signed it. So now it's up to the counties to whether they are going to enact it or not. And I personally, this is an issue that we've been trying to tackle. I went to a rally this weekend at the Jackson County Courthouse, and I met a lot of very concerned people that some of these people are going to get taxed out of their homes. The most, you know, we're talking disabled, you know, or the elderly, the most at-risk populations are going to lose their home because they're going to be taxed out of them.
That's something I've been concerned about. With the issue of schools in a second. When we touch on schools, it feels like sometimes I watch the Jackson County, I don't want to say problem, but I watched some of the turmoil begin when they did this audit. And it was paid for by some of the taxing entities. Now, I'm a person that's a pretty big fan of a lot of those things. Local control, local folks. But it doesn't, I bet you, if you and I put together a study and we got paid by a group, I bet you if taxing entities paid us to do a study, we could go get some bar napkins, go up with a study that says, well, taxes are too low, you should raise them, because we're going to get that money, right?
Correct.
I sometimes don't always trust folks if they have a dog in the fight when they're telling me, well, taxes are too low in Jackson County. Well, yeah, but if they go up, you'll be the beneficiary, right? That's picking a poke to me.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And honestly, I don't have any extra money, and one of the people that I've talked to, they don't have extra money around laying around to pay for extra taxes. So I'm not sure what they're talking about, but they are too high.
When you first got elected, you were shot out of a cannon. Right as you came into office, independents said they were going to go to a 4-day school week. That, I know, sent a lot of shockwaves through not just you, but through the community, right?
Absolutely. And, you know, I've thought about it a lot, and that's why unequivocally I am for school choice, because I think this gives parents the options that they need to get the best education for their children. Because ultimately, I think a zip code shouldn't dictate the quality of education a child should get. And I, if elected, would allow those parents to have absolute local control and choose their children's education.
You know, I understand that schools have a problem keeping teachers. Everybody's got a problem keeping employees right now. It's not isolated to schools. But boy, you look at it, I mean, I've got a 7-year-old. I've got a now 14-year-old, my goodness. Mm-hmm. The 14-year-old could get off the bus and be fine after school, or maybe stay home alone. You know, we can figure it out in rural Missouri. But the 7-year-old can't stay home alone. What do people that work for a living do? Most people work Monday to Friday. What do they do with a 7-year-old?
Absolutely. And not only that, the studies have shown that the 4-day school week has had an increase in crime. And I even asked our superintendent if we'd done any kind of economic impact study on what it would do to the local economy, and he said he hadn't done it. And so I think it's going to have a huge negative impact on the children, also the local economy.
So let's walk through some issues. You've got a big issue coming through. I-70 runs right through Independence, right? It connects the entire state together. I don't know, you could serve in the state senate for 8 years, and I'm not sure any vote you would have taken would be as impactful to the state as the one to expand I-70 to 6 lanes. I mean, it's an enormous deal for, even if you don't live on I-70, it impacts everyone in the state.
Absolutely. Actually, yesterday I drove across the state twice, and I had ran into an accident in one of the lanes, and it completely turned it to a standstill for 30 minutes. And the one thought that crossed my mind the whole time is how quicker this would have been and how safer this would have been if we would have had 3 lanes.
If you get on I-70 from Columbia to Independence, the speed limit can say 70, but you can't drive 70. It's chock full of traffic. I mean, there's no. If you drive 55, you're probably having a good commute, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Not with the trucks and then the passing lane. It's pretty difficult to actually go the speed limit. And I think it's going to be safer, more effective, and it's going to be an economic boom to the entire state.
Well, let's talk about crime. Crime, whether some of those folks in the Boot Hill like to admit it or not, if there's going to be a highway built in southeast Missouri, if there's going to be a government program, it's probably going to be paid for by folks in the cities. People talk all the time about crime in those cities. What do you do right now to control crime in St. Louis and Kansas City?
Well, the first thing and the largest thing is we have to have prosecutors that are willing to prosecute the law. Crime has to be punished, and if habitual offenders think that they can do something and then get out on a signature bond, it's not going to effectively act as a deterrent to keep violent crime or any kind of crime down. And so that's one of the most important things that we can do is try to get active and hold our public, our public officers accountable to do their job. And I think that we've had a clear problem with that happening in the prosecutor's office.
It's an interesting thing. You can't have a suburb of nowhere, and those major cities have arteries. I know Independence is not a suburb of Kansas City. I would never insinuate that it was. But
those are fighting words.
These urban areas, they matter.
Yeah.
And I don't know that anybody's got the answer, but I mean, some of these things seem like almost common sense solutions to it. Let's talk about another common sense solution. When you brought up, you're on the Utilities Committee. I mean, it just goes back to, when you talk about energy and you talk about power in the state, it goes back to gas prices. Tell me again, there is something that can be done. You've been in the military, you've traveled the world. There's something that could be done by the federal government to help Missouri drivers, right?
Absolutely, free market. When we have more sources of a certain product, that naturally drives the price of that product down. So if we have more areas that we can get oil from, more sources to get oil from, it will drive the price down. And so that's why we need to diversify and do what we can do to help ease the pain at the pump.
Lastly, you running in Eastern Jackson County, enormous shoes to fill. Senator Rizzo has become a giant in this state. What a legacy that's been left behind from your predecessors in that seat. It's got to be a little daunting to know that if you enter the state senate, you enter with very high expectations and very big shoes to fill.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree with that statement more. It's a very heavy as the crown, right, or the head, and I take it with the utmost respect and the utmost. It would be an honor to fill those shoes, and I couldn't say that enough.
Representative McMullen, as the campaign unfolds, hope you'll come back and talk to us here on This Week in Missouri Politics about it. Absolutely. Thanks for having me. We'll see you next week at our St. Louis studios for This Week in Missouri Politics.
This Week in Missouri Politics is sponsored by the Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, Ameren, Spire, and the United Electric Cooperative.